So, hello, all. Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. I'm not going to talk just about grains, but I'm talking mostly about grains and mostly about the ones that I prefer to use for bread making. But I'm going to go ahead and list off my favorite grains and flours to store. So, the first thing I want to do is list the types of grains and flours that I like to keep stored up. Obviously oats, and I like to store rolled oats rather than oat groats myself. Uh, White rice, wild rice, like the wild rice blend. I love that now and then to use I make a stuffing out of it that I like to put in turkeys and chickens. Popcorn, of course, wheat, and that would be hard white wheat. I don't like red wheat, as I stated in my last show. Barley, one of my favorites. Whole white corn. Let's see. And then as far as flours, I store the organic unbleached white flour. And then I'll have some gluten-free flours. And now I might consider storing like some buckwheat, hulled, because it's a pain if it's not hulled. The reason I started storing them as flours is I don't have to, if I'm cooking for someone or baking for someone who's gluten-free, I don't want to have to worry about cross contamination from my wheat grains. For those who cannot have gluten at all. And so I just buy the flour and keep it on hand. That's kind of easier for me. Where can you buy large quantities of rice, beans, rolled oats, and wheat? Now, for me personally, and I know Tyler already knows this, but it's a good question to put out there. I get all of mine now from Azure Standard. And now we have a drop point. So the first delivery is coming up really soon. So I don't have to pay ship. So here we get free shipping, which is excellent. So people, if you get Azure Standard and you're in other places across the states, you might have to pay a percentage for shipping. But here, because Azure Standard is in Oregon, just a state down from us, and they've been doing routes across Washington and Oregon forever. It's just that our remote little town is finally put on their map. Yeah, we don't have to pay shipping, so that's going to save me a lot. But anyway, they carry quality stuff. It's organic. It's non-GMO. They're constantly testing things and vetting things and making sure what they're getting is quality and is indeed organic and is indeed non-GMO. And I probably trust them more than any other company. Yes, all of my grains, all of my flours now I get from Azure Standard. Now, Costco does have a really good deal on the unbleached organic flour. You can get that there, and especially if you don't have like an Azure Standard or a drop point near you, there are some things you can get at Costco. Costco isn't that close to us either. Now, the two grains I use most commonly for my homemade breads and that I mill up myself are going to be the hard white wheat and the barley, and it's a blend. So it's the only visual I brought in with me, and it's a big jar. It's because it's always stays in this room right next to my grain mill, and I just refilled it. So what I do is I take my barley. Let me hold up to the camera. You might be able to see there's a variance in color and shape. The smaller, darker ones are the hard white wheat, and the fatter, lighter ones are the barley. And so I do a 50-50 blend. Now, barley is a soft grain. So barley by itself, just like soft white wheat, would work well for your pie crust, your biscuits, your more delicate things. But when it comes to making a yeast bread, you want to have a grain that is higher in gluten, which is where you're going to want your harder grains like the hard white wheat. Or if you like red wheat, you can go with hard red wheat, which I don't like red wheat. I don't like the flavor of it, never have. So hard white wheat, I've been using hard white wheat forever. I've tried mixing it with all kinds of different things and with the soft white wheat, but then decided a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago, I switched to barley, partly because it was getting harder to get the soft white wheat. And because barley's gonna have some added benefits that the wheat alone isn't gonna have, just like anything else, one thing's gonna have more benefits and more nutrients here, another thing's gonna have more benefits and nutrients there. So some may ask if they're new, and if they're new to the whole concept of storing grains, why would I store the grains and not the flours and everything? Well, because when you're talking about your whole grains, they're going to have, for one, a much longer shelf life, mostly in the we're talking about nutrient content. Because once your whole grains have been ground into a flour, you start losing your nutrient content out of those a lot faster. And so it's best to use them as fresh as possible. So, like if you're buying your whole grain flours from the store, by the time, even if they just stocked those shelves and you bought it as soon as they stocked it, by the time it gets to the store, it's already lost quite a bit of the nutrients, because when you don't even know how long it was sitting in storage before it was packaged up and then shipped to the store, how long it took to get to the store, how long was it sitting on the shelf. And so you're far better off, if you're wanting it to get the most nutrients out of your flour, to store your whole grains and then mill it up yourself. But then comes the work. After milling, over half the nutrition is lost from wheat in 72 hours. Yeah, I couldn't remember the time frame. So thank you, Tyler, for throwing that in there. I should have looked it up again, but see, I don't have to, because I got you guys helping me out and throwing that information in there. But yeah, it doesn't last long when it comes to your grains. Now, you'll still always keep certain amount of minerals. Well, you're always going to keep your minerals. You're going to keep some of your other nutrients, but and obviously you're still going to get your carbs and the things you need for the energy. But yeah, I mean, you want to keep as many nutrients in there as possible. So I used to, when I was doing it, grinding them all by hand before Patrick hooked up the motor. I would grind up a bunch of flour, try to get as much going. So it'd take me all day. I'd go grind a little bit, grind a little bit, grind a little bit, and then I'd keep it in the freezer. But then I find that a freezer can kill nutrients as well. And sometimes you can lose more nutrients in the freezer than you can in canning goods. So I'm not sure how well freezing it now would actually preserve the nutrients. But then there's another issue when it comes to freezing, where it can be important when it comes to your whole grains. So if you're concerned about weevils, and I don't think to do this every time, but I try to remember to do this. Every time I get a fresh bag of grains, it doesn't matter if it's popcorn, it doesn't matter if it's barley, if it's the wheat, I throw them in the freezer for 2 to 3 days, maybe a week if it's a 50-pound bag. And yes, I'll make sure I have room, because we have 2 freezers. One's really big and the other one is moderate size, and I use that one for putting the grains in, because I can usually easily make room in there. So I can store a bunch of ice packs in there that I get from Misfits Market. And then because those are good for a lot of things, if you want to put them in a cooler, you're going out to the property, you're going to the beach or whatever, you got something to keep your stuff cool and you don't have to go buy ice. But and then they keep the freezer full, so you're conserving energy. But then when I need that space for my grains, I just take those ice packs out, put the grains in there, and then I put the ice packs back in once I pull the grains out. Now, what will happen with that when you freeze it, if there's any weevil eggs inside your grains? See, the grains could be clean when you get them in, but you won't know if there could possibly be weevils that have laid their eggs inside the grains, because that's what they do. They lay inside the individual grains, and then the little larva will eat through the grain. Once it hatches, it will eat through the grain. And then you'll start noticing a powdery stuff in your grains. Then if you start looking closer, you might see weevils. So freezing them will kill them in the grain, so you don't have to worry about it. Now, Why would there be a concern even with high quality grains, and especially with high quality grains that are non-GMO and organic with weevils? Well, because they haven't been sprayed with pesticides, because they're non-GMO, you're going to be a little more likely to get weevils in there because you don't know when the weevils at any time in once they've been harvested, they can get a weevil in there that laid an egg, and all it takes is one, and you can end up, you know, getting weevils all through there. Now, weevils aren't going to hurt you. It's just kind of gross, the whole idea of it, but they're not going to hurt you. And people shouldn't be afraid of it, but you want to keep your grains as whole as possible, obviously. So freezing them and then, for anywhere from 3 days to a week just to make sure. And the reason I go for a longer period of time with a bigger bag is to make sure it freezes all the way through to the grains that are in the middle of the bag. And then what I do just to make sure there's no moisture content once I pull them out of the freezer and let them come up to room temperature is I will open the bag, I'll put it in a safe place, and then I'll put a cloth over it to keep dust and other things out. And then for a few days, I'll keep stirring those grains up and try to make sure I'm getting all the moisture out before I pack it up. Especially if you're going to pack it for long-term storage, because if there's any moisture in there, you could lose the whole batch because then you're going to get mold. And so what I do for immediate use is I do keep them because I buy in such, usually 25 to 50-pound bags. And then I keep them in large buckets. And since I get them from Azure Standard, and I appreciate, this is the other thing I really, really prefer about Azure Standard, is they pack their grains in paper bags rather than plastic, like one place I used to buy from did. And I will then just keep them in that paper bag rather than putting it in Mylar, because Mylar's basically plastic and metal. And so I would prefer not to have to put it in the Mylar bags, and they can get expensive, and just use the bags that already come in, because they're usually triple bagged. And then I'll just take that whole bag and set it down inside the bucket and work out of that bucket from there. Now, when it comes to long-term storage, that then is where the Mylar will come into play. So some people will like to use oxygen absorbers. I find them to be a complete waste of money and time, because you never know if the ones you get are actually going to work. It seems like I always end up with a bum batch. Not always, but most of the time. So I gave up on them. So as long as you're getting out as much of the oxygen as possible, they should be good. So I put the grains in the Mylar, I push it down and push it down, pushing out as much of the air as I can. And then I'll take a flat iron and then seal that Mylar. If you can get them, they do make the Mylar bags with the Ziploc. So you can always just do the Ziploc, and that way you might be able to use that bag again. Not always, because sometimes it can get holes worn in them. So you got to watch for that. But usually you can use it again, especially if you're getting a good heavy mill. I don't recommend buying anything less than 5 mil, and you can get higher than that. It's going to get more expensive the thicker the bag is, but you're going to ensure longer storage that way. The bag is going to hold up longer. It's going to last longer. It's going to put up with a lot of stuff better than I don't even know what the thinnest one is. It 3 mil or less? I don't know because I've never bought anything less than 3 or 5, excuse me. And then the CO2 thing, I'm glad Tyler brought that up, because I wanted to bring that up, but I wasn't sure of the procedure there. So you can store grain in 5-gallon buckets with a hamburger-sized piece of dry ice wrapped in a paper towel. CO2 will drive out the O2. So thank you, Tyler. I've heard of this. I've never done it, but I've heard of that. And I've heard it can be a very good method to use. And I think there's some others. So anyway, once I've got it, in the Mylar bag, I also still keep those in plastic buckets, and most of those get kept in an offsite location that is uh, safe from rats and mice. But if you're going to store such things in a place that you're not sure are going to be safe from rats and mice, then I highly recommend going with galvanized garbage cans instead of the plastic buckets, because rats especially can and will chew through plastic. Now, the Mylar one, for a while there, I was thinking, okay, I'll just put them directly in the bucket. Why waste money on the Mylar? But then somebody brought up the fact that the Mylar bag, one of the other things it does is it helps reduce the possibility of the scent of the food that's in there getting out and catching the attention of rodents that will then want to chew through the plastic bucket. And if they can chew through the plastic bucket, they will most certainly chew through the Mylar. And yeah, so that will help in that way. It'll be a little bit of a deterrent, but I do still recommend using galvanized garbage cans. So obviously in this case, I'm talking about large amounts. I'm not going to go through the trouble of vacuum sealing the amount of grains that I put up. I'm not going to go through the trouble of vacuum sealing them all into jars, because that's going to take a ton of jars and all the biggest jars I can possibly find to do that. And that's going to be that'd be a lot of jars. So no, I don't use jars for vacuum sealing my grains. But if you're not interested in putting up the quantity that we do of your rice, your beans, your lentils, then yes, you can vacuum seal into jars. No need for oxygen absorbers in that case, because you're already vacuum sealing. I've heard putting a bay leaf in the buckets helps. Yes, bay leaves are supposed to help, but don't bet the bank on it. Don't bet all your grains on it. I've used bay leaves before. It does not kill them. It just helps prevent them. If you've already got weevils in there, it's not going to do a darn bit of good. Another thing you can do is put diatomaceous earth into your grains, because it's good for you anyway. You won't be able to taste it, but it will also help kill. That will actually help kill weevils if they start hatching out. But I still wouldn't even bet all your grains on that either. I know this from experience. So, yeah. But with my case, it was because I realized too late I had weevils in a bucket of spelt. And they were past the point that anything was going to work. No, not the bay leaves, not the diatomaceous earth. It might have killed some of them, but they were populating too fast by that point. So I had to just feed the whole bag to my chickens. They got the weevils and the grains, so they were happy. It was a bummer, but hey, at least it wasn't a complete and utter waste. Now let's talk a little bit about grinding grains. And I'll talk about what I use, and I did go ahead and link to it in the description box. However, please note, it is almost twice as expensive as it was when I bought it, and that is the Country Living grain mill. I absolutely love it. It's made right here in Washington State. So in the United States, it's built like a tank, is very solid. It's got a big grinding wheel on it, which makes it much easier for if you're going to crank by hand. The reason there's so many things I like about this, and why to me it was worth it for me to spend that kind of money, because I think when I bought it, it was around $400. Now it's almost $800. But because of how sturdy it was, because it was made in the US and even made in my own state, but because of that big wheel for grinding by hand, the bigger wheel is actually easier than a smaller wheel. But then also having the ability, because it's got the groove in the wheel, that you can, put any kind of belt in there and hook it up to something else, whether it be a treadmill or a bicycle, what do you call it? An exercycle where, it's already stationary anyway. Or like Patrick did for me, he rebuilt an old motor, and that thing's worked beautifully. And it's much, much faster. anyway at grinding the flour because I can get a couple of cups of flour in maybe about 10 minutes, where that much flour, if I was to grind it all by hand, that would probably take me a couple hours to grind all that. It depends on the flour, it depends on the grain. Hard grains will go through the mill much faster. It's harder to grind it. There's more tension there as you're grinding it, but they go through the grain mill faster. So I figured I can do a cup in, actually it doesn't take me, I think it's only 5 minutes. I can do a couple cups of flour with the motor. But I think with the hard grains, it takes about 15 minutes to do a cup. And for the soft grains, it can take up to an hour per cup. That's why I like mixing the two soft and hard grains, because it gets that good middle ground if you're grinding by hand. And that's going to be no matter what grain mill you get. But the thing is, having the ability to grind by hand is, let's say we don't have enough, maybe it's the middle of winter, we don't have enough solar power, we don't have enough power in our battery bank, because we're not getting enough solar power because it's short days. The solar panels have been covered with snow, or it's just been dark, dark, dark. Then I can grind by hand if I don't have any public power. So I like having the ability to do that. While I highly recommend the grain mill I have, I realize that is a massive expense, and it is not the only grain mill out there. There are smaller ones you can get that are hand crank, that aren't going to break the bank. Just keep in mind, they will take a little longer, but at least it's still something. And then you can get some electric ones. I've heard a lot of good things about the Wonder Mill. Even though I haven't heard much about it in the past several years, I know that Zach and Jamie were using the Wonder Mill. I don't know if he still uses it, but I know that's what Jamie was using when she was grinding up her grains for flours, and she loved it. And there's a local lady that has, I think hers is a Wonder Mill. I know it's electric, and it just takes a couple of minutes to get a cup of flour. It doesn't take all day. And though I know the Wonder Mill is still going to be expensive. I don't know what the cost of it is now, but it's going to be a lot cheaper, a lot less in cost, let me put it that way, than the Country Living grain mill. Is it made cheaper? I don't know, but I'm guessing it's probably mostly plastic, like the outside of it. But obviously the grinding parts aren't going to be plastic, or they shouldn't be. I do recommend having, even if you go with an electric version of a grain mill, still make sure you have a way to grind your flours just in case of a power outage and you're needing to grind up some flour because you want to make some bread, but now all you got is whole grains. So now here's the other thing though about my grain mill is the one I bought and the one I linked to actually came with the corn and bean auger, which is necessary because I like to buy the whole white organic non-GMO corn from Azure Standard. And that's what I use when I make the cornbread for the hillbilly, the Tar Heel beans and cornbread, because we use white cornmeal for that. And so I just keep the whole corn, and then I'll grind. Every now and then we'll switch those plates out, maybe once a year or so. I'll grind up a bunch and then keep it in a jar like this with the bale wire that has a nice tight seal on it. And then once I work through it, then we'll do that again. But it's a bit of a hassle to change out the auger, but it doesn't take that long. I just have Patrick do it for me. I need to learn how to do it myself. Patrick, I need you to change out my auger. So, okay, I've been using my electric Nutri-Mill stone mill to grind all of my grains. I live off grid and have a generator as a backup to charge my battery bank if needed. So, yes, this is good to know. There's other brands out there. And unfortunately, I would love to share them all with you. I just don't know them all because all I know is what I've used and what I've seen other people use. So that's why I appreciate the the interaction, the comments in there about what people are using that they're happy with and has worked well for them. But oh yeah, with the corn and bean auger, if you can get a grain mill that has that, you can not only use it for just like the dent corn, but you can use it for grinding popcorn into. That's what I've done with the popcorn I've grown, because it's not great. The glass gem corn, at least when we grow it, it's not best for popping, but it's great for making cornbread. So we'll change out that corn and bean auger and just grind up a bunch of that, and it works great. And you can also, when it comes to just regular grains, you can also grind rice. You can make your own rice flour. You can make your own oat flour. I would recommend going with oat groats if you're going to do that, rather than oats. They're going to go through the grain mill a lot better. If you have a peanut butter auger, then, which we also have that. The company was nice enough to gift us one a few years back. And we've made peanut butter with it before, but you can make other types of nut butters, almond butter and whatnot. And you want that because you don't want to do that with a regular auger, because it's just going to get too clogged up. That's why it's a special type of auger that goes in there. I think I covered all my main points there. Love y'all. Take care and God bless. See ya.